The mountain had always been there, watching us work with borrowed iron. Every beam we had rolled, every gear we had cut, every rail we had laid across the workshop floor, all of it had come from scavenged scraps, salvaged fittings, metal pried from the bones of things other people had already used up and abandoned. We had done extraordinary work with it, I knew that. But there is a difference between what you can accomplish when you are rationing every ingot and what you can accomplish when the ore comes to you by the ton, on your own rails, from your own mountain. I had known for a long time that we would eventually have to make that leap. The day we finally stood at the mouth of the old mine and looked into its dark throat, I felt the weight of everything we had built pressing at my back, urging us forward. Everything we've built, we built from scraps, I said to the team gathered behind me. No more. We opened the old mine, and we never run short of iron again. No one argued. They had all felt the shortage in their own way. Mokjae rationing stock for the tool room, Tae-ho banking his forge fires lower than he liked, Cho-young's apprentices learning to file a blank down to almost nothing before they were allowed to start over. The scarcity had sharpened us, now we were going to end it. I stood at the mine mouth alone for a moment before the others came up with the survey gear. The entrance was low and dark, timbered in the old style, most of the crossbeams rotted through and needing replacement before any of us would step 10 paces inside. The smell that came out of it was cold iron and wet stone and something older than both, the deep breath of the mountain itself, held for years. A mine took me out of one world and dropped me in this one. I had thought about that often, in the quiet hours between shifts when the forge had cooled and the workshop was just shadows and the smell of oil. It seemed fitting then that a mine was where the real work began. Not the preliminary work, not the proving work, the real work, the kind that could not be undone. Seo-rin had come up the slope ahead of the rest, the way she always did when there was measuring to be done. She moved through the rock cuts with a lodestone in her hand, reading the face of the mountain the way I read a surface plate, looking for deviation, looking for truth, looking for the line that would tell her what everything else was trying to hide. "This band pulls the lodestone," she said, pressing 2 fingers against the dark stripe in the exposed face, iron-rich and dense, running at a shallow angle into the hillside. "Follow it. The pale seam isn't worth the timber to reach it." I crouched beside her and looked at the 2 bands side by side. The pale one was wider, more visible, the kind of thing an untrained eye would chase. The dark band was narrow and easy to miss. She was right, of course. "Measure before you dig," I said, "same as everything else." She did not look up from the rock face. She never needed acknowledgement when she was working. We spent the better part of that morning tracing the rich seam, marking its angle of descent, estimating where it widened and where it pinched. Seo-rin recorded everything in her ledger, strike and dip, color and grain, the lodestone's response at each sample point. By midday we had a map of what the mountain was willing to give us, and where it would make us work for it. Doh Gwang had come up from the works walking carefully, his recovery still showing in the measured way he placed each step on the uneven ground. But his eyes were sharp, and his voice carried the same flat authority it always had when the subject was safety. He walked the perimeter of the mine mouth, then ducked inside far enough to read the state of the existing timbering, then came back out and stood with his arms crossed, looking at the crew. "A mine kills the careless faster than any wheel," he said. There was no drama in it. He was simply stating a condition of the work, the way you state the boiling point of water. Timber every span, no one digs alone or tired. He laid out the reopening sequence, drainage first, because standing water in a shaft is a promise of collapse. Shoring second, every section checked before the next section opened. Air testing third, a lamp lowered on a cord before any man descended, watching the flame for the signs that the air had gone bad. The crew listened without fidgeting. Doh Gwang had earned that kind of attention, and they knew it. The drainage work took 3 days. We cut a channel along the low side of the main gallery and let the accumulated water find its own way out, helping it along with a small pump Mokjae had assembled from workshop stock. The water that came out was rust red and smelled of sulfur, and it ran down the hillside in a thin, bright line that stained the rocks below. The mountain bleeding out its old wounds, making room for us. While the drainage ran, Mokse's team was already at work on the infrastructure, the things the mine would need before it could feed the works, and the things the works would need to build to make the mine function. It was the kind of problem I had always found satisfying, a system that had to construct itself, each piece enabling the next. The rails came first. We had the pattern already from the workshop floor. Shop-made iron rail, spiked to hewn timber sleepers, laid in a gauge we had settled on early and held to ever since. The ore carts were simple, a welded iron box on 4 flanged wheels, a pin coupling at each end, a handbrake on a ratchet. The winch was more involved, a drum, a ratchet and pawl, a long handle for manual operation, with provision for a future power drive when we had the capacity to spare. Mokje built it the way he built everything, to the drawing, to the tolerance, with a kind of quiet stubbornness that refused to call something finished until it was actually finished. He was watching the first cart run on the new track when he said it, almost to himself, "The mine feeds the works, and the works builds the mine. It's like it loops." Cho-young was beside him, checking the wheel flanges against the railhead. She looked up with something that might have been amusement. "That's the whole trick," she said. "Everything we build helps us build the next thing faster." I heard them from across the cut and did not add anything. They had understood it themselves, which was better. The rockfall happened on the 8th day. We had opened a new section of the gallery, following the rich seam as it turned slightly and dropped. The timbering crew was 2 spans ahead of the dig crew, which was the correct order. But the mountain does not always respect correct order. A section of the upper face let go without warning. Not a catastrophic collapse, but enough to fill the gallery with dust and send loose rocks skittering across the floor in the dark. The crew came out. They came out the way Doh Gwang had drilled them, in order, without running, each man accounting for the man behind him. I was at the gallery entrance when they emerged from the dust, and I counted heads before I let myself breathe. Doh Gwang came out last. He stood at the entrance and looked back into the settling cloud for a moment, then turned to face the crew. "Out, calm and ordered," he said. "Rushing is how the second one dies." He waited. The dust thinned. "Everyone breathing?" They were, every one of them. "Reshore it and we go again." There was a pause, not hesitation, just the moment a crew takes to absorb a close thing, and then they went to get the timber. That was the discipline Doh Gwang had built into them, not fearlessness, which is just ignorance wearing a brave face. Discipline, the knowledge that the correct response to a dangerous thing is the correct procedure, applied without panic every time. The reshoring took the rest of that day. The section that had failed was rebuilt stronger than it had been. We went again the next morning. By the end of the second week, ore was moving. I stood at the top of the rail grade and watched the first loaded cart roll down under its own weight. The brakeman riding the handle, the wheels singing on the iron rail in a tone that was almost musical. The cart was not large. We had built conservatively, knowing the grade and the rail capacity, but it was full of iron ore, our iron ore, from our mountain, moving on our rails to our works without a single outside hand involved in any part of it. "From the mountain to the works without one outside hand," I said, to no one in particular. "That's not just iron. That's independence by the cartload." The cart reached the bottom of the grade and ran out onto the level siding beside the works. The brakeman set the ratchet and stepped off, and the cart sat there in the late afternoon light, patient and full, waiting to be emptied and sent back up for more. Seo-rin set up the Bufaneshun station between the minehead and the works, a crushing stage, a sorting screen, a grading table where the ore was separated by quality before it ever approached the furnace. It was not glamorous work. It was the kind of work that only reveals its value over time, when the furnace runs clean and consistent and the iron that comes out of it is predictable enough to build from. She ran the grading with the same precision she brought to everything. Each batch was assessed, sorted, recorded. The high-grade ore went to one pile, the mid-grade to another, the lean material set aside for a use we had not yet determined but would find. Feed the furnace the same quality every time, she said, checking a sample against the standard she had established on the first day, and it gives back the same iron every time. Surprise is the enemy of metal. I had said something similar to Mokshe once, about feed rates and cutting tools. The principle was the same. Consistency in, consistency out. Variation is where things break. Wol-yeong came up to the mine site on the third week, which surprised me. She did not usually leave the lower town without reason. She stood at the edge of the work area and watched the crews moving, the diggers, the timberers, the cart handlers, the sorters at the grading table, and her expression was something I did not have a ready name for. 3 months ago they were begging at the gate, she said. She was not speaking to me specifically. She was speaking to the fact of it, the plain visible fact of what had changed. You opened the door for every soul the court left for dead. I looked at the crews she was watching. She was right that most of them had come to Iron Ridge with nothing. The court had made its decisions about who mattered and who did not, and these people had been on the wrong side of that calculation. Now they were timbering a mine, grading ore, learning to read rock and manage a brake line and drive a cart on iron rails. They were learning things that would be useful for the rest of their lives, in ways the court had never intended to give them. I did not say anything to Wol-yeong. There was nothing to add. Tae-ho had been patient, which was not his natural condition. He had watched the ore accumulate at the grading station, watched the carts run, watched the bovinification process sort the mountain's yield into clean, consistent feed, and he had said very little, which for Tae-ho meant he was thinking hard about something he was not yet ready to say out loud. He came to me on the evening of the 21st day, when the light was going gold, and the works below us were lit by forge glow and oil lamp in equal measure. He looked at the ore stockpile, which was substantial now, and then he looked at me. "Give me something that can drink," he said. The hunger in it was not metaphorical. It was the specific hunger of a man who has spent his life working a fire that was never quite large enough for what he wanted to do. A furnace as tall as a tower. I had been waiting for him to say it. "That's exactly what we build next," I told him. "You're going to pour iron like water." He looked at the stockpile again, and something in his face settled. Not satisfaction, not yet, but the particular stillness of a man who can finally see the shape of the thing he has been working toward. We had the ore. That was the fact I kept returning to as I walked the rail grade in the last light, watching the final cart of the day make its descent. We had the ore, in quantity, in consistent grade, moving on our own infrastructure from our own mountain. The scarcity that had constrained everything we had built, every gear cut thin, every casting made to stretch, every ingot rationed like medicine, that scarcity was ending. What came next was the fire to free the iron from the rock, at a scale we had not yet attempted, in a furnace that did not yet exist. The blast furnace, tall as a tower, hungry as Taopo had always been, capable of drinking ore by the cartload and giving back liquid iron in return. I looked down at the valley, at the works we had built from nothing, at the lights coming on one by one as the evening deepened. The veil over the town was pale at the edges, thinner than it had been when I arrived, doing what failing things do, holding on but only just. We needed to move faster than it was failing. That had always been the condition of the work. The ore was secured, now we built the fire to free the iron from it, and then this whole valley would glow.